As you can tell by the thumbnail, I'm no expert. So, if you want a creative mastermind, you've never lifted a brush before, perhaps you've done a little bit of D&D, but not much else, this video is aimed at getting you up to speed on what I've learned in mini painting over the last year and a half. So, I've done a bit of D&D, that's how I've got into mini painting. D&D is one of those things where there's weeks between sessions because you've got to sync up everyone's timetable and there's just nothing to do. As a DM, you might be prepped weeks in advance or you might be prepped last minute, but there's always time in between, and especially if you've got that D&D energy and you want to do something, mini painting great for that bit of time between sessions. So, I decided that all the little minis the cheap little minis I bought off Amazon that weren't primed, they weren't painted. Obviously, some people use dyes. I decided I wanted to paint them and have some interesting fun between my D&D sessions. So, I went to the GW store and I did one of their taster sessions and I painted this guy, who is a Space Marine from Warhammer 40k. So this is from the Warhammer store. They're everywhere in the UK. If you want to go to a taster session, I highly recommend it. And you'll get into painting, they'll tell you how to paint, how to thin down your paints. They'll do a lot. I'll probably cover that as well at some point. But their taster sessions are amazing. You can either paint one of these guys or a Stormcast Eternal from Age of Sigmar. I've got some of them downstairs, but I did a Space Marine. That's the guy from the thumbnail, and yeah, you can see him in all his glory there. So I did that and I realised GW models are really expensive. They might turn out really good, but they're really expensive. So what I did was my cheap models off Amazon that I primed them, and there's a funny story there and an upcoming video. My partner's an artist and had some gesso laying around. Apparently it's similar to primer. It did a terrible job. So I think a funny video might be trying to use this. But then we very quickly got some Chaos Black primer and primed all of the cheap minis and did that. The big difference between the cheap minis and the GW minis, I find the detail on GW minis to be a lot easier to paint. It's a lot easier to get into nooks and crannies. On these minis, you'll get a lot of bleed over because those surfaces aren't necessarily really well defined. So you can see on the skirt here, there's just that little bit of bleed over of the brown. And on a GW model, there's still some of that. Bear in mind, this is the first mini I ever painted. There's a lot less of it. So in my experience, GW models are a lot better and definitely worth the price tag if you can afford it. But equally, some cheap models from Amazon, they're great for practice. And the other thing that's also great for practice is the mini of the month. So every month, Warhammer Games Workshop, they come out with a little mini of the month. This is one of them. This is a tank. That released a few months back. And this also released a few months back, a little zombie-looking guy that I've painted to kind of resemble Gollum from Lord of the Rings. So, minis of the month, they're another great practice method. But between that and some cheap minis, there's some practice. Other than that, GW models are your best bet. But like I said, I primed it. What else did I need to paint? Well, there's paints, obviously. And there's a lot to choose from when it comes to paints. You've got these two paints here. Your Morphing Brown, Kislev Flash, there's tons more. The ways to buy paints at least if you're buying Citadel paints, which are the ones that Warhammer and Games Workshop sell, they sell starter sets, and they're a great way for you to get all the tools you need and the beginner paints straight away. What I'd recommend is buy a starter set for whatever model you want to paint, and then buy a few other paints if you want to. So that's what I recommend. I'll put a link to it in the description to both of those starter sets that I'd recommend. Other than that, Army Painter and stuff, they have a few paint sets, but they're on the more expensive end. The starter sets come in at like 20 quid. You get a nice little bit of plastic like this that stores your paints in. You can put your mold line remover in there. You get your clippers. You get your little brush, which mine's just over here. You get your brush, and you get a bunch of paints. And that includes some textures and everything as well. Great value for money. You'll very quickly find, though, when it comes to paints, your collection will expand. And might very quickly turn into looking something like this. This is about £300 worth of paint. And there's everything here. So for me, like I said, I do a bit of D&D. My current D&D campaign is a lot of purpley, fluxy sort of stuff. So, there you go. That's a dragon, and that's the sort of vibe of my current D&D campaign. So I brought a lot of purples, probably spent about 30 quid on purple paints. There's some textures like this granite, which I did this basing earlier. So texturing is this stuff here. So you can see how the base has a texture to it. If I can get the camera to focus. There you go. So you see how the base has a texture to it? That's what these textures are for. And with those, you use a texture spreader, which is essentially just a little spatula or something. Then you got all your paints. This will build up over time, but to start with, just get a starter set. I'll link one in the description, and you'll see what I mean by that being a great value for money. But what tools do you need if you don't want to go out and buy a starter set? You want to buy all your tools separately. You need a brush. If you're buying GW models, if you're buying Games Workshop models, you will need a pair of clippers. You will need a mold line remover. You may or may not need, depending on which model you buy, plastic. Some models are push fit, so some models you'll push together and they'll just have joints and sockets. Others you'll need plastic for, depends on which model. Sorry, plastic glue. This is good. The reason why it's good is it will melt the plastic together. I'd recommend it regardless, but you might not need it. But you definitely need this stuff if you're doing GW models. So you need a brush. You need one. Can't skimp out. What you can do is you cannot buy a GW one. GW ones are incredibly expensive. All you need is a fairly standard brush, a bit on the smaller side, obviously. If you go to a hobby store and ask for a model painting brush, this is a size 0. Again, I'll try and put a link in the description. But just a small brush. That's all you need. GW ones are really expensive for what they are. Another issue is with brushes. Obviously, a lot of them are sable, which is horsehair. So if you have an issue with that, you know who you are. There are alternatives. Generally, the advice is go for horsehair, but there are a few alternatives, and there's a Reddit thread. If that applies to you, go have a look. So GW brushes are really expensive, but if you're in the Warhammer store, just grab them. They're about 6 quid. If you need a brush, just grab a small one. Or you can go spend, I think I spent £3.50 on this, as opposed to £6 on one of these. So there's your brushes, your texture spreader, if you need one. Then, if you are painting terrain, so something like this, where you have some brickwork and there's a lot there, it's not going to be fun to paint it by using a small little brush. You're going to want some large synthetic brushes. Synthetic brushes are great for when you don't need to have fine detail and you just want to slather some paint on something so it doesn't look like it's made out of plastic. Maybe it looks like it's made out of brick or whatever. To get that look, you want a synthetic brush. These are all sable brushes. And they're great for detail work. Now, some other brushes. We have some dry brushes here. Dry brushes, essentially, you don't have any, if not a little bit, of water on your brush, and you put the paint on there, and you use it for catching the raised edges of some minis. On the large ones, that obviously applies to your terrain and edges of bricks and stuff like that. On your small one, that applies to your minis. So, examples of that. This stone here, you see all these white edges. All of this is dry brushing. And that's a technique that I'll explain at some point when we're actually painting a model. But that's what you need a dry brush for. This we would use a larger dry brush for. But then, on actual minis, you will occasionally see that there is some stitches and stuff. And you can see that there's a bit of a lighter texture in some of the areas of that brown. That's a dry brushing of a different shade of brown over a different brown. So it just makes stuff look a bit lighter in certain areas. It can be useful. You don't need to do it if you don't want to. For just starting out, you don't have to. It definitely adds that layer of texture and makes stuff look a bit more realistic. So, let me just check my list here. Here's one that you won't expect. Grab some toothpicks out your kitchen. Toothpicks are bloody great. Reason being, you can scrape paint away with a toothpick. Both if you've got some paint in like a little crack somewhere, you can sort of scoop it up. But more so, you can scrape away at a top layer of paint. So on this model here, I'm not sure if you can see the browning. Yeah, you can. You can see the browning there. On this model, what's actually happening is we have two separate coats. We have, give me 2 seconds, there. A silver, which I'll show you in a second, and we have a Bugman's Glow. Sorry about the camera shake. So there's a silver. You could either use lead bletcher or this or whatever other silver paint you want. That goes on last, but underneath is a Bugman's Glow. So what we do is we do a base coating of Bugman's Glow, let it dry, then we do silver over the top and scratch it off. You can use a makeup sponge as well, but I've had toothpicks. You just can scrape away a bit and you get that effect of it being rusted. It's easier to do when you've just applied your silver paint or it's dried for about a minute or so. So it's not completely set, but you can scrape it off still. And that gives that lovely rusted effect. So we've got dry brushing, we've got some tooth picking. That's it really. There's and half of this stuff you don't need, right? You don't need these dry brushes when you're starting out. Throw them away. And it will be really tempting. You'll start and you'll think, oh God, I really, really want like this little tiny brush for doing eyes or something. Don't. Often, it's not going to help at all. Just that fine little point. You're going to have too much paint on it, or you won't have enough paint on it, or it won't dry properly. There are other ways to do eyes. You do not need to go out and buy a tiny, tiny little brush to do eyes or anything. Not worth the money. So you don't need one of them. You don't need 3 small brushes. You need 1. And you can go buy a cheap one from somewhere that's not Warhammer Or you can buy a Warhammer one. They're great. They're not bad brushes. It's convenient if you're there anyway. You don't need these unless you're painting terrain. If you're buying like the starter set and it comes with some terrain, grab one, sure. Texture spreader. You could scrape it with your fingers if you want. I wouldn't want to. So I'd get one of these if it were me. Just because you can scrape it in nicely, but you could probably find alternatives. A toothpick would probably work, but I would recommend getting one. So I would personally leave the store with these two. If you're buying a big starter set that's got some terrain, possibly one of these, but probably not. And then, depending on what minis you're buying, if you're buying some cheap ones off Amazon, you're not going to need these. If you're buying some from Games Workshop, you are. And depending on what models you're buying, you might need plastic glue. If you don't know, ask the guys in the shop. They'll know. Just ask them. Or you could probably Google it as well. And you're going to need some paints. Now, like I said, your paints will expand and grow. Like I said, I've got tons and tons. But the starter sets are a great way to get started. The other thing you'll need, and I'm sure you've seen me waving it around, paint handle. These are about $7.50. There are other ones you can get. I find the GW ones just be great because they just stretch out. And you pop your mini in. And it's that easy. Done. There's other ones which rely on magnetics, etc, etc, etc. These are great for just starting. I've got two. And the reason I've got two is a lot of the time, I don't know where my second one is at the moment, but a lot of the time you'll do a coat on something and you'll need to go and do something else. So you want to have two, ideally, so you can leave it for a minute and go back to it and swap between two models. Or you can be patient and wait if you've got the patience of a saint. I don't. I'm very much involved and I want to sit down and paint for 4 hours. The other thing you're going to need is some paper or something to put paint on. GW, they sell their like paper, that paint pad thing. I don't know if you can tell, I basically walked in and bought everything. I'm a bit of a sucker like that. So I bought that paint pad, and to be honest with you, it's great. It's lasted me. I bought two, I think, because one fell apart completely because we moved. Actually, I don't even know if I brought two. This might still be my first one. Yeah, actually, I think this is my first one. So I brought one of these. And that's that. And some primer as well. You need some primer. That's everything. That's all you need to start painting minis. Yes, it ain't cheap. You're looking at spending about 100 quid. But with that 100 quid, you're going to spend hours upon hours of getting better at a skill. You're going to feel better about yourself. And eventually, you're going to have something that you can sit down for 6 hours and just chill and paint. It's going to take you 2 or 3 hours to do a mini. It's going to take you like 30 to do something like this. That's 50 quid. I don't know about you, but cinema at the moment costs me about 20 quid to go and have popcorn and everything. Or I can spend 50 quid and have 30 hours with this guy. And that's some fun right there. And considering I want to strip it and restart it, it's even more fun. Now, fun, yeah. Pain in the arse as well, definitely. So that's a video on basically everything I have learned and can speak aloud. There are going to be other videos coming, hopefully in the very, very near future, about how we actually go about painting, how we thin down our paints, how we do all of that in case you can't get to a store to do a taster session. So, what I'm going to leave you with is thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you found this informative. This video is probably going to be just a catch-up video, more than anything else. Other videos will be about painting, will be about what decisions I make when painting a model, how I decide what colours are going on it, and all of that. So this is my Heed Knights Lanesh, and that's probably what we're going to be focusing on. That combined with the orcs. We're also going to be focusing on these guys over the next little bit. That's the plan. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the description. I'm really looking forward to getting started.